Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last episode of the Axis Analysis Tutorial, Episode 6. This episode will be covering finishing the order of play with non-combat, mobilization, collecting income, and how to win the game, as well as research die. Before talking about non-combat, I'd like to discuss retreating for just a moment, as I haven't really hit on it in this series. I'll be brief as I try to keep these videos under 10 minutes apiece. If an attacker in their attack decides that the battle isn't going their way after one round, they can choose to retreat. However, you can only retreat into friendly territory that you control. This applies to land combat and sea combat. Pictured on the screen here are examples of places that the attacking units can retreat. I've experienced games where players have claimed that they could retreat into the enemy territory and capture it. This is wrong. Now that we've completely finished combat, let's move on to the non-combat phase, the fourth of the 6 phases in Axis and Allies 1940 2nd edition. Phase 4, non-combat movement. Non-combat occurs after combat has occurred and offers good time to consolidate and fortify wherever you may need to. Any units that didn't participate in combat are now free to move. Aircraft are a special case given their unique movement capabilities, but normal land and sea units are fairly simple to explain. Let's start with aircraft. Aircraft that participate in combat must land in a territory that you have owned since the start of that turn. So if your aircraft took off from Norway and took part in a battle in Novgorod, it can only land in territories immediately adjacent to Novgorod, since it has already used up 3 of its movement to reach Novgorod. If you don't own any territory immediately adjacent, or if the territory you planned to land in was a friendly neutral, this was an illegal move on your part. This should be counted out and considered well before the rolling begins for battles. Aircraft can be sneaky if you don't consider their movement though, so as a word for the wise, it's always a good idea to check and see how far each enemy plane can move, because that plane can give you major headaches if you don't consider their potential. Aircraft also must find elsewhere to land if their aircraft carrier has been damaged or destroyed. In this example, the tactical fighter could no longer land in the aircraft carrier and must choose between landing in Egypt, Alexandria, Transjordan, or Syria. In this case, we choose Egypt. If an aircraft scrambled in an amphibious assault that occurred, the territory is lost. They can find a territory one adjacent to where they are, or must perish. So in this example that you're seeing now, the Germans brought in their navy, and the French and British have a combined navy outside of Normandy. The Germans decided to bring in 2 infantry on transports, and the French have built an airbase in Normandy, so they can scramble their fighter they've got there. The Germans are also attacking from Holland, Belgium, keep that in mind, and in this sea battle, the winner ends up being the Allies. So the Germans have lost all of their units in that amphibious assault, and the scrambling proved to be a success. So, taking off all those German units here, and British lost a cruiser. So it was a heavy battle, but they won. Now, the French fighter is waiting until non-combat, and these guys roll in their combat move, and the French unfortunately lose. They were a little bit outnumbered. The Germans had 3 tanks and 4 infantry, and they didn't lose a single thing, so all that luck in the sea battle was kind of countered in this battle. But anyway, the French fighter in this case has nowhere else to land, because now the Germans occupy Normandy. So they gotta land in the UK. They have nowhere else to land. If the UK was occupied by the Germans, then the fighter would have been destroyed. This is a very unique case, but it's important to know. Now we'll discuss aircraft carrier pickup. Aircraft carriers also offer aircraft a chance to land in the sea tile as long as they are mobilized in that zone, move to that zone, or are already in that sea zone and have room aboard the ship for aircraft. To reiterate, aircraft carriers can carry up to 2 air units, not including strategic bombers. Even if the sea zone has enemy ships in it, your seaplanes can still land on a carrier that was mobilized that turn. In this example, Japan produces an aircraft carrier and has a fighter and a tactical bomber that are returning from combat in Korea. They can land on this carrier, and at the start of America's turn, America can choose to confront the carrier or to move away. All other units that didn't participate in combat are allowed normal movement into friendly or friendly neutral territory. Even if an enemy territory has no units in it, you cannot move into that territory. This is a common beginner's mistake. You can, however, move units that you didn't participate in combat into newly captured territories. This is also the only time AAA guns can conduct movement. C units cannot move into or through hostile zones. The aircraft carrier pickup rule only applies to carriers that were built into a C zone adjacent to controlled territory. Aircraft carriers cannot move into an enemy C zone and pick up aircraft. Submarines are the exception with C units, and they can move past enemy C zones but must stop their non-combat movement in a C zone where an enemy destroyer is present. At the start of the next turn, the opposing player can choose to confront this submarine or to move away. This is also a rule that new players often overlook. Transports can pick up and move units into friendly coastal territories this turn, unless they've participated in combat already. The land units that are being loaded, however, must have not participated in combat to be able to be picked up, for this counts as their movement for that turn. And that wraps up non-combat. Moving on to Phase 5 of 6. This phase will talk about mobilizing new units. You can move your units you decided to purchase in Phase 1 from the mobilization zone to a factory that you own. I'd like to mention here that you can only own major industrial complexes in territories that you have owned since the very start of the game, or territories that you have your nation's marker printed onto the game board. For example, Japan cannot build a major industrial complex in Gyeongsu, and America can't build one in Korea. I just recently ran across this rule in a game with a friend. You also cannot place units in factories owned by another member on your team, or in factories that you just captured that turn. We've discussed unit capabilities already, and so in major industrial complexes we know that you can only place 10 units, while in minors you can only place 3. Any damage that existed on a facility should have been repaired during Phase 1, and if you didn't pay for it, then you cannot place your units on this factory. To understand how damage affects facilities, click here. Something to be mentioned here is that land units cannot be produced into transports like aircraft can be produced into aircraft carriers. You can also use this turn to place new facilities in territories that you have owned since the start of your own turn. Industrial complexes cannot be built on islands, another classic newbie mistake. If you bought more units that you can place on the map that turn, you place units of your choice back into your box and you're compensated with those units' IPC values. For example, if you overproduced a couple infantry for Japan, you will get 6 IPCs back for next turn. And finally, Phase 6, collecting income. Pretty simple, just count the number of territories under your control. Once you've counted up all the territories you own, a couple things must be looked at and are often overlooked even with the most experienced of players. Conduct convoy disruptions, a critical part of the collect income phase. Any land territory that has a convoy logo next to it and has an enemy ship next to it must conduct convoy disruption rolls. If, for example, a British submarine is in Sea Zone 97 next to Italy, all the territories owned by Italy around that sea zone have a potential to be reduced. A British submarine gets 2 dice rolls because submarines are unique in their capability to disrupt convoy shipments, while normal surface warships and aircraft aboard aircraft carriers each get 1 dice roll. Carriers themselves are not allowed to roll any convoy die. So, the British submarine rolls its die and it gets a total of 9. So, when Italy collects its income, it automatically deducts 9 IPCs from its income. This can be devastating for a nation's economy. Also note that when Germany collects income, and if Germany owns the territory of, say, Yugoslavia, then they could also potentially lose income to this convoy disruption. A hint for newbies playing against other players is to always look and watch other players during their collect income phases, because sometimes the opponent doesn't always check for enemy ships in their convoy lanes, whether that's intentional or unintentional. Don't be too glum though, because a nation can also earn extra IPCs as a result of achieving a national objective. To save some time, I'll put these national objective bonuses in the description. You should definitely take the time to sit down and read through these bonuses that I'm going to post in the description. And perhaps even print these out on a card so you can remind yourself at the start of each turn what you should be going for. The game doesn't actually give you cards with these printed out in them, so it might just be a good idea for you to do this on your own. Italy gets 5 extra IPCs for the entire Mediterranean being free of all allied surface warships. So if you remember from the last example, that British sub, even though it caused us some pain with those convoy disruption rolls, also does not qualify as an allied surface warship, so Italy gets that 5 extra IPCs for this turn, albeit it would only be a net 4 IPC gain. However, bonuses can get much bigger, as witness to the United States, who in the Global Edition gets an extra 20 to 25 IPCs just for existing once they're brought into the war. This will make the Japanese player reconsider their strategy, who actually gets a bonus for not attacking French Indochina and keeping America out of the war. Once you've counted up your income based on the territories you own, conducted convoy raids, and accounted for extra income, which should be done in that order, you've completed your turn and the next nation steps up to the plate to start the 6 phases all over again, which are purchasing and repairing units, combat moves, conducting combat, non-combat moves, mobilizing new units, and finally collecting income. I'd like to remind the audience that phases 2 and 3 should be kept separate to keep the game as fair as possible. Combat movement is where you commit to your attacks and do all of your thinking. Your purchasing ends after you move your first unit into a hostile territory and have taken your hand off the piece. If you prefer a more relaxed approach, I've seen people commit to battles and adjust their buys off these commitments. Generally, a good rule of thumb is to keep the spirit of the law in these few phases, as opposed to being more strict. You can't have more strict rules, as for example, not being able to go back to purchasing and changing your buys after you've moved a unit into a territory and taken your finger off the piece, or after you've begun rolling for that attack, but that is up to the player's discretion. If you'd like to learn more about the earlier phases of this game, check out the earlier episodes, or check out the PDF rulebook in the description of this video. Finally, the part everyone's been waiting for. How to win the game. Winning the game. There are 2 conditions on how to win the game in Axis and Allies 1940 Global Edition, as the Axis or the Allies. For the Allies to win, they must control Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo for a complete round of play, as long as they also control 1 Allied capital at the end of the turn. For the Axis to win, they must control a total of 8 victory cities, highlighted here on the European map, or 6 victory cities, highlighted again on the Pacific map, for a complete round of play, as long as they control an Axis capital at the end of that round. A round is defined as a cycle through all countries, to clarify. If you're playing on the board separately, the conditions are a bit different, as is the setup, and you should consult the rulebooks on each board on that. Look at that, we're practically done. Our journey is almost complete. Before we part, let's talk about some concepts we haven't hit on yet. The first is research die, which is actually an optional rule, but it does spice up the game a bit. Research die must be purchased during phase 1 of your turn, and each die costs 5 IPCs. You roll these at the end of your purchasing phase. If you score a 6, you've achieved a breakthrough and may select any breakthrough between these 2 breakthrough charts. The risk is high, but the reward is great. If you have enough money to spare, investing here isn't a bad idea. Finally, let's talk about kamikaze tiles, which only exist in the sea zones near and around Japan. Japan is allotted 6 kamikaze tokens during the game and can use these during an amphibious assault or during a sea battle. Each token hits at a 2 or less, not giving them much power, but serving as a great ace in the hole if America is relying on bombardments to take out your forces on, say, Korea. 1 kamikaze ship prevents an entire fleet from bombardment. Pretty handy, and it balances out America's gigantic IPC income for just existing. The person using the kamikaze chip also gets to select which ship they are striking at, another great perk of the kamikaze chip. Japan only gets 6 a game, however, so they should be used wisely.
Hey everyone, Equilibrium Television. I wanted to thank you for watching this series. After 2 years of working on it, it's finally finished. I'll be putting a lot of relevant and interesting links in the description, including a calculator for battles, an IPC tracker, the PDF with the rulebook, virtual version of the game, which you saw me use in this video, and probably a few other things. But I want to thank you all again for watching this. With the community growing as it has been in the past few years, I know that it's important to get stuff like this out online so people can learn the game quickly without being overwhelmed by all the rules, because it is quite an intimidating game. It's Risk on steroids. But other than that, that's all I got to say. If you enjoyed, give it a like. If you got any questions, comment below. And for more videos like this, feel free to subscribe. In the future, I hope to put out some strategy videos of my own. I know that there's some out there already. And I'll probably be playing some live virtual games of this with my friends online in the future, which should be fun to watch. So keep an eye out for that. Equilibrium Television. Ciao.
If an aircraft scrambled in an So in an attack, if an attacker in their oh my god. Okay. This makes Japan reconsider their strategy. If an attacker in their attack decides that the battle isn't going their way, after one round, if an attacker in their attack decides that the battle isn't going, at the start of the next turn, the opposing player can choose to confront this subway. Oh man.